The Rebbe Zalgazunzheim began the Farbrengen this afternoon, stressing that today is the Shabbos, which is Shushim Purim Cotton, and yesterday was Purim Cotton. And as we know always that all the inyanim that take place throughout the week have their elevation on Shabbos, how much more so is it when these inyanim are specifically on Friday? And we know this expression, Chazal, Misha Torach be'erev Shabbos yechol b'Shabbos, one who prepares erev Shabbos has what to eat on Shabbos. So, though Chazal in general refer not to specifically erev Shabbos, it refers to preparations which are done for Shabbos throughout the entire week, but still there is a much closer tie between erev Shabbos and Shabbos than there is between any other days of the week and Shabbos. Memela, here we are talking about this Shabbos today, and this Shabbos, as it comes behemshech into continuation right away with Friday being Purim Cotton, and Shabbos is Shushim Purim Cotton. The Rebbe stressed, in all inyanim, we have to always find for ha'maisa hu ha'ikar. Mainly what counts is to take a lesson out of all these inyanim, so a hera which we can bring down into daily action. What can we derive from this inyan? Purim Cotton comes as a preparation to the main Purim, to the Purim Gadol, which we will have in the next month. And therefore, the one who prepares properly, prepares himself properly and gears himself properly in Purim Cotton, he will be able to adjust himself and get the greater inyanim which will come in the big Purim in a month from now. The Rebbe referred to a teich from the Alter Rebbe, which is quoted often in Chassidus, "V'hu yechal kelecha," meaning that the Rebbeinu Shloilo makes up the kelim, the Rebbe makes up the vessel. All we have to do is to utilize it. So Memelo, by utilizing Purim Cotton and Shushim Purim Cotton, when this is utilized properly, this serves as a proper preparation to the Purim Gadol, which will come in a month from now. If the preparations which we will do on Purim Cotton and Purim Gadol will be in a small format, in a limited way, the Rebbe express himself with an example. For example, if all we will do is prepare ourselves with one bowl of soup on Purim Cotton, then it'll come to regular Purim, we will be able to increase it and have 2 bowls of soup. But naturally, this is not the realm what we are looking for. We're looking for a much more be'ein ha'roichdike inyanim, and therefore the proper preparations have to be on Purim Cotton and Shushim Purim Cotton, which this is yesterday and today, and today elevates the yesterday because Shabbos elevates the Sheish Tzimei HaMais, and particularly Friday. How much more so when this is done properly, this will have an effect that all these hamshachas which have to come on the regular Purim will be in a much larger scale. Then the Rebbe Zalgazunzheim continued that there are always those Marish Chayranikis. And these Marish Chayraniks will come and complain. How would you translate a Marish?
What? Pessimist.
It's more than a pessimist.
Doubters.
It's more than a pessimist.
It's like between a shepherd and someone who's depressed.
That's right. Yeah. They will come and ask, what is the source in halacha for demanding such great simcha and such great inyanim on Purim Cotton? And they will say, let us approach the Shulchan Aruch. And if we look into the Shulchan Aruch, we will see that in Shulchan Aruch there's a special siman about Adar Rishon. And there are various opinions quoted in the Shulchan Aruch how we are supposed to act on Purim Cotton and Shushim Purim Cotton. And there is, obviously, it does not seem that Purim Cotton should arouse such a tremendous simcha as we just discussed, that Purim Cotton comes as a preparation to Purim Gadol and all of that. However, the Rebbe says when we look into a halacha, we have to gear ourselves to always find the maskana, meaning the conclusion. There are various opinions which are discussed and are quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. However, what we have to look for is what is the final conclusion of the siman in Shulchan Aruch. In this particular case, the siman in Shulchan Aruch, which discusses the inyanim of Adar Rishon, concludes with the words, V'toiv leiv mishtatamit. One who is good-hearted will always enjoy, a mishta will always enjoy a feast. Memela. So, we have it right here, very obvious and very spelled out, very clear, that our attitude as far as the Purim, which is an Adoration, goes, that has to be in a way of Toiv Leiv Mishtatam. I just said it. In a Toiv Leiv, a good heart, is Mishtatam. And this inyan of Toiv Leiv Mishtatam, the Rebbe compared it like we find in Chassidus, it stressed there are many inyanim which are not discussed in Torah Shebiksav. But why is it that it's not discussed in Torah Shebiksav? This shows the greatness of the inyan. For example, Hakafis. Rabbi expressed himself. It's definite that Moshe Rabbeinu also participated and took part in Hakafis and Simchas Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu also danced with a Sefer Torah around the Bimah. However, there is no mention in Torah Shebiksav about this inyan of having Hakafis and Simchas Torah. What does this show us? That there are inyanim. Another inyan, for example. There is an inyan of, very famous inyan, the inyan of Nisuch HaMayim, the pouring of the water which took place on Sukkot. And this was something which was done with an extensive amount of joy and played a tremendous role in the Beis HaMikdash. And on the other hand, this inyan is not mentioned befeirish in a pasuk in Chumash. How is this so? So the Alter Rebbe explains in Chassidus, Dafke, mitzad the fact that these inyanim are so high and so great that they cannot be expressed in a pasuk in Torah Shebiksav. The same benegei the simcha, which we are supposed to have on Purim Cotton, is such a great one that it is not expressed in a halacha, which should tell us exactly all the details how we are supposed to enjoy Purim Cotton. It comes in an expression as the conclusion of this siman in Shulchan Aruch is v'toiv leiv mishtatam. Here the Rebbe led from one inyan to another that there's an expression from the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe expressed himself that when Mashiach will come, the situation in the world will be such that kula mashke, it'll be totally mashke. There was Alter Rebbe meant to express that it will be such a great level of simcha that kula mashke.
What did you say? One is good-hearted will always enjoy a good feast.
Yes, it's the conclusion of a siman in Shulchan Aruch.
Okay.
Rebbe was this mekasha with the custom which has been going on in recent years, that for various occasions the Rebbe gives his participation of a bottle of mashke. And the Rebbe's participation of a bottle of mashke is, as the Rebbe went on to explain, this is geared either to a person who goes on shlichus to a specific city or a specific country, goes to fulfill a certain mission. And Memela, when he comes to his destination, and meets with certain individuals, in order to have a hishtatvus, a participation from the Rebbe, in the get-together, in the Sudas Mitzvah, in the Chasidische Farbrengen, which will take place wherever it may be, for this specific cause, the Rebbe sends a bottle of mashke. Other occasions, where there is a Chasidische Farbrengen, or a Malava Malke, or any inyan which comes about together with the Suda, this is something which arouses by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says that there is room for the inyan of sending a bottle of his mashke to such type of an inyan. Unfortunately, the Rebbe says there are those who are observing certain people getting mashke for certain occasions, and this arouses within them a feeling that them too would also want a bottle of mashke. Memela, when they will travel to a certain city on a private inyan, and naturally we know there is an inyan in Shulchan Aruch of Bechol Derchecha De'eyu, in all our ways we have to refer to the Rebishter constantly. So definitely this individual who will travel to a city will also get involved in an inyan of Afatzas HaMayonis. So he will ask the Rebbe to send through him also to that specific city a bottle of mashke. Rebbe says, but it does not work out properly. Why? Because somebody who just went specifically on a shlichus to that area, to that city or country, just got a bottle of mashke. And here we are asking for somebody who is not going on a specific mission, but he's going for his own interest and for a private inyan, he's going to the same country. This will take away from the chshivas, which the shliach that just may have went a day or two or a short period ago, went to the same area with a bottle of mashke. And the Rebbe spoke about this inyan at length with various expressions, and the Rebbe cited, for example, when there's a concert taking place, and the concert, it says may be a very worthwhile inyan. In fact, the funds of the concert, the proceeds of the concert, go for the upkeep of a shul. But this does not mean that to this specific concert there is need to send a bottle of mashke. So what's going to happen if a bottle of mashke is going to be sent to a concert, and the chazan, who's supposed to sing at the concert, is going to drink a little bit too much mashke, then it's going to ruin the concert. But again, this is not the inyan of the Rebbe's mashke, that it should be used for a concert or for other such type of things. The Rebbe said he received for correspondence from somebody who is making a certain type of a Farbrengen, a certain type of a gathering. However, it wasn't spelled out, wasn't clear that at this gathering there will be also a meal served. Distribution of mashke is where there's an initial suda. Whether it's a sudas malva malka or another type of a sudas mitzvah, that's where there is room also to distribute mashke. So this is what the Rebbe responded to this individual. So an individual wrote back to the Rebbe, okay, so we will have a meal at this gathering as well. The Rebbe says this is not the inyan. The whole concept of his participation with mashke at certain occasions and certain malva malkas or other such type of inyanim is taken out of its proper concept and totally misunderstood, and he very much wants that it should be properly understood. What is the inyan of the Rebbe is giving mashke, and it's not something which at every type of occasion, whatever may happen, or whatever's... For example, where there's a siyum, one makes a siyum, and a siyum is an inyan, this is what Salach and Shulchan Aruch, that at a siyum it is proper to make a suda. And when there's a suda made at a siyum, then there is room that for such a type of an inyan to participate with a bottle of mashke. However, a different type of inyanim, there is no room there for an inyan of sending mashke. The Rebbe says his inyan is not vodka chas v'shalom. And Memela, it's got to be understood properly that when he does participate in any type of a inyan, any type of something which simcha shel mitzvah or whatever the cause may be, it has to be a proper cause where it is proper that the Rebbe should participate with the sending of his mashke. Me'inyan le'inyan, says, in other words, discussing one inyan leading to another inyan. The Rebbe spoke about another inyan, and this is that the Likutei Torah was reprinted. Likutei Torah actually comes as a continuation to the Torah. And there's already a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe where he explains why the Mamarim of the Alter Rebbe and Bereshis and Shmois are entitled Torah, and the Mamarim and Vayikra Bamidbar Dvarim carry the title of Likutei Torah. But anyways, it is a continuation of the Torah. And the Likutei Torah was recently reprinted again. The Rebbe expressed a very big thanks and gratitude for those who were involved and were helping in the reprinting of the Likutei Torah. And the Likutei Torah now has many additions added to it which do not appear in the previous editions. And primarily the Rebbe explained this is that when one learns a maimah today in Likutei Torah, there are comments, footnotes, which show where the inyan which is discussed in this particular maimah, where else this inyan is discussed in the mamarim of all the Rabbeim. And this, the Rebbe says, is a tremendous asset. In other words, when we're learning a given maimah in Likutei Torah, we have ha'aras, we have comments showing us where in Chassidus, from all of the Rabbeim, from the Alter Rebbe, all the way to throughout all the Rabbeim, where this specific inyan is discussed. The Rebbe said that those that were involved in the publication of the Likutei Torah deserve a great thank you and a great praise. And he realizes that there were many sleepless nights that they put in to be able to produce the Likutei Torah as it came out with all of these additions and all of these notes. And in fact, throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe had the new edition of the Likutei Torah with him, and the Rebbe spoke about it with tremendous amount of warmth. In fact, the Rebbe referred that initially when the Likutei Torah was printed, the first Likutei Torah was printed in Vilna. seems like that's where the press was, the printing that was able to accommodate the printing of a Likutei Torah. When the Likutei Torah came back to Lubavitch, there were some of the elder Hasidim who were not so satisfied with the fact that the Likutei Torah was put into printing. Some of them expressed their feeling because Chassidus mainly is made that we should be able to harve in Torah, harve in Limud Chassidus. Work hard, toil in the learning of Chassidus. As long as Likutei Torah wasn't printed, Hasidim were learning these Mamorim. But where were they learning the Mamorim from? They were learning the Mamorim from manuscripts, from handwritten manuscripts. And in handwritten manuscripts, it's very common to find errors. So if one wanted to test himself, if he's learning properly, or he's just saying the words, if he would find an error, a handwriting, an error in the writing, this would prove him, this would be a sort of an evidence that he's learning properly the Inyan. V'harai, he was able to find some sort of a mistake. Now that the Likutei Torah was put into printing, and naturally all the mistakes were proofwritten, there are no more mistakes, so they felt they would be able to learn Likutei Torah, and they had no way of testing themselves if they are learning Likutei Torah properly. Maybe they're just saying the words, not understanding what they're saying. But the Rebbe says, naturally, this is not a proper approach. There's a halach in Shulchan Aruch which tells us that al tashkim ba'alecha avla, which means we're not allowed to possess in our homes any svarim that have any errors. If we know that we have svarim that have printing mistakes within them, al pi halacha, we are not allowed to possess such type of svarim. There were other chassidim, elder chassidim, chassidish yidden, that had another type of a resentment to the fact when the Likutei Torah was printed. The way the Likutei Torah is set up is that it is Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe. The one who really prepared all of these Mamorim was the Alter Rebbe's grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. There are many inyonim in the Mamorim that are in parentheses. And if we look carefully, we will see that there are two kinds of parentheses. There's a parentheses where the contents of the parentheses is printed the same type of lettering as the rest of the Maimah. And there's a parentheses where there's a different type of a lettering, a smaller print for those letters. It is basically accepted, the Rebbe says, that the difference between the two types of parentheses is that where the parenthesis is in smaller lettering, this is a comment which the Tzemach Tzedek added on his own on the Maimah de Alter Rebbe. And where it is in regular print, it can at times be from the Alter Rebbe as well. So there were those chassidim that felt, he used the expression, to express himself, there's a Russian expression, petach, which means fool. What difference is it to you if these words are from the Alter Rebbe or these words are from the Tzemach Tzedek? As far as we are concerned, these are the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these are the words of Torah, and we shouldn't have any type of preference whether it's the Alter Rebbe's words or the Tzemach Tzedek's words. Talking about this, the Rebbe says it would be a worthy project. He doesn't know who is really capable of undertaking this project, and it seems it would be a very hard project. One should sit down and really screen all these parentheses to find out exactly which, and compare it to old handwritings and manuscripts, to find out which is taka the parentheses which is an addition from the Tzemach Tzedek, and which parentheses are taka from the Alter Rebbe. Again, stressing the great chashivos of the new edition of the Likutei Torah. The Rebbe opened the Likutei Torah during the Farbrengen and turned to the very beginning. Also commented, Chazal tell us, "Ein Adam oimed al dvar halacha elam kein nichshel ba." One should really know a halacha well. He really gets to know it well once he has an error in this inyan. Once he himself has an experience with a mistake, then he learns to know the halacha properly. The Rebbe says when he got to Likutei Torah, he opened to the first page and he saw the comments. So what he did was he wanted to go ahead and look where they refer to in these new comments which are printed. So the Rebbe says he took the first ha'ara and he took the sefer and wanted to go and check it. And naturally the first one he found to have a printing mistake. But again, in no way, he says, does this underestimate in any way the greatness of this new edition of the Likutei Torah. The first maima in the Likutei Torah is a maima on Parshas B'Shalach, beginning with the words, Riyu ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. Rebbe says it's very strange, because the Torah Oyer, which is the first part of Likutei Torah, as we just mentioned, has all the Mamarim on the Sefer of Shmos. B'Shalach is a Sedra in Shmos. Actually, Likutei Torah begins with Mamarim and Vayikra. And it seems like that for some reason, the Tzemach Tzedek had a reason which we do not know his reason, and it is not revealed to us. And even if we were to think of reasons, the Rebbe says we will definitely not come to the reason what was the Tzemach Tzedek's intention. But the Tzemach Tzedek put in the first Maima in the Likutei Torah to be a Maima on Parshas B'Shalach, which is in Chumash Shmos, though Likutei Torah is Mamarim on the Chumashim of Vayikra B'Midbar and Dvar. This first Maima is mentioned beginning with the words Re'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. See, Hashem gave you the Shabbos to Yidden. Why is it? It says that this should be an appropriate inyan for the beginning of the Likutei Torah. Because the Alter Rebbe asks, there's an interpretation of the Alter Rebbe, Benegei Parshas Bahar, where the Torah discusses the dinim of Shemitah. Pasuk begins that when you will come into Eretz Yisrael, you will observe Shemitah. So the Alter Rebbe asks, what's the pshat? You will come into Eretz Yisrael, you will observe Shemitah. First, we have to have 6 years of working in our field. Once we have gone through 6 years of working in the field, that is when we have a Shemitah. How does the pasuk say, Ki savayu ala haaretz, v'shafsa haaretz Shabbos l'Hashem? First thing is, Ki savayu ala haaretz, you work 6 years in the field. After working 6 years in the field, that is when it's v'shafsa haaretz Shabbos l'Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe explains that what is the entire goal of the Ki savayu ala haaretz? Pasuk, entering Eretz Yisrael, pasuk right away tells us what the goal behind this is. The goal behind coming into Eretz Yisrael is that v'shafsa haaretz Shabbos l'Hashem, that we shall come and realize that there's an inyan of Shabbos, there's an inyan of Shemitah, and the Balabatishkeit of the Rebishter, which this thought is expressed in the concept of Shemitah. Same thing, the Rebbe says, is the idea of Shabbos. Shemitah is in years, Shabbos is in days. Tzemach Tzedek begins with a maima that deals about Shabbos, because the contents of this maima is stressing the maila of Shabbos. And Shabbos, in comparison to Chayil, is like Teiras HaNigla is in comparison to Teiras HaChsidus. Teiras HaChsidus, we know, is always compared to the concept of Shabbos. And here the pasuk says, Re'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. See that Hashem gave you Shabbos. What is the difference between Re'iyah and Shmiyah? Hearing or vision. In Gemara and Talmud Bavli, we find the expression Toshma, come in here. In Talmud Bavli, or particularly in the Zohar, we do not find the expression. In Talmud Yerushalmi, and particularly in the Zohar, there's no expression of Toshma, there's an expression of Tochazi, come and see. Seeing is a higher level than hearing. This is what Chassidus always stresses. Ein edai meshmi al ariyah is an expression of Chazal. The Mela, the pasuk here tells us we have to realize the greatness of Shabbos, which the whole idea of Shabbos is Shabbos l'Hashem. And it comes with an introduction of Riyu. We have to see that. In other words, not only at the level of Shmiyah, but at a yet higher level, at the level of Riyu. Getting back to the other inyan which Rebbe referred to in today's Farbrengen, what Rebbe referred to another inyan which was regarding the printing of the Tanyas. Rebbe spoke with great praise about a series of Tanyas which were printed in a country, and in that particular country, we was referring to the country of Brazil, where a Tanya was printed in every city where Yidden live in Brazil, reaching to over 100 Tanyas. The Rebbe says this is something which he just received before Shabbos, and it brought a tremendous amount of satisfaction to the Rebbe. Rebbe expressed himself, this is not only an accomplishment in a particular city or a particular area. This is considered an accomplishment in an entire Medina, in an entire country. And we are now talking about the Inyanim of Purim. In Megillah Esther we find the stress of Medina. In other words, there's an Inyan of a Iyad, there's an Inyan of a city. However, when we're talking about a concept of a Medina, it is much broader scale, a much larger scale than in comparison to a city. And here, the Tanya was printed in each and every city where Yidden live in this particular country, which is something which is extremely worth of praise. While talking about the Inyan of printing of Tanyas, the Rebbe also mentioned that he has heard that there are in many cities, there are many countries where the Tanya is being reprinted, and at the same time, the people involved there, what they're trying to do is not only reprint the Tanya, but use this as a means of a fundraising, as a vehicle to raise funds for their ongoing institutions. The Rebbe said this has nothing to do one with another. Their institutions have to raise money for their worthy institutions, no question about it. However, this inyan of printing the Tanya is something which has no shaykhs to any fundraising project. This is something which is purely with the inyan of Afatas HaMayonis, to see to it that the Tanya should be printed in each and every city where Yidden live, in each and every country where Yidden live, and no way to utilize this as a way of fundraising for other activities which are going on in that particular city or in that particular Maisad. It has no shaykhs one to another, and he was surprised to hear and to see that there are those that think that this can be used as an avenue for fundraising for their ongoing institutions. Rebbe said that when we're talking about specific projects, they are not to be used for avenues of fundraising. And he cited an example when we were talking about Mifta Sefer Torah. Mifta Sefer Torah was also an inyan, where the inyan was the writing of the Sefer Torah. And there are those who are constantly observing to criticize us. They are under the impression that by writing Sefer Torahs, we made tremendous sums, enormous sums of money. And the Rebbe says it is not so. It is far, far from being so. They make a calculation that there's a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah has more than 304,000 letters. And how is it that a person doesn't contribute at least $1 for a letter? And in many cases, people will contribute more than $1 for a letter. The writing of the Sefer Torah plus the supplies is no way does it come to the couple of $100,000 which can be raised through writing a Sefer Torah. Rebbe says, however, what is not taken in consideration is all the expenses that are involved around the mitzvah of Sefer Torah. There are forms and signing up the people on the forms, later mailing people to Udois that they have acquired an ois and a Sefer Torah, the printing of the Tudois, the mailing of the Tudois, and notifying them which letter and which pasha they have acquired. And all of this, the Rebbe says, is really involving hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses. A svara, in other words, a possibility that after all the income for the letters of the Sefer Torah, the writing of the Sefer Torah is finished with a deficit of quite a few $100,000. This is what the Rebbe said. Memele, in other words, what he's trying to say is that when we do a miftzah, we should not get involved in utilizing the funds for other things, because people will have various suspicions and various look behind our backs and watch what we're doing, and therefore we have to be careful that when we are printing the Tanya, the funds which we are collecting for printing the Tanya should go solely for this purpose and not to be utilized for anything else. Another meaning which the Rebbe referred to is that recently there are tremendous amount of Sifrei Chassidus that are being printed. We have many Svarim from the Alter Rebbe, Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, many Mamorim from the other Rabbeim. And this is something which in previous generations, if Chassidim would have had access to so much Chassidus, so much printed Chassidus to learn, it would have brought about a tremendous simcha b'kahal Chassidim amongst the Chassidic community. And today the Rebbe says, we see that there's so many Chassidish Sfarim being printed, and everyone is taking it for granted, and nobody is really appreciating the fact that there are new Sfarim coming out. Memela, we have new Mamorim to learn, and we can keep on learning more and more Chassidus. Really nobody is appreciating these great inyanim which are being revealed to us. Discussing these inyanim, the Rebbe referred to a taich from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Chazal tell us that when Mashiach will come, the Gemara gives us a sign. One of the signs which Chazal give, the Gemara gives on Ikvus and Mashiach, on the days before Mashiach will come, is that Yidden will say, Anu ein lanu lihishayin ela alavinu shebashamayim, that we can only rely on the Rebishter. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asked, what's wrong by saying that? Chazal say that one of the things which is going to happen before the coming of Mashiach is that Yidden are going to have an attitude within themselves that all we can do is rely on the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, it's a very, very positive attitude. Someone says no. When people take an attitude, Anu ein lanu lihishayin ela, there is no other alternative other than to rely on the Eibishter. This is something which should not be that way. We have to do ourselves. We have to do, together with our actions, we have to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. But to sit back and say, we don't have to do anything, and ein lanu lihishayin ela alavinu shebashamayim. In other words, every word in Chazal is extremely accurate. Those that say, Anu ein lanu, we have no other thing, ela, but, exclude ourselves from anything, only to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we have to do only to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not do anything on our own, this is something which is not welcomed. This is an unappreciated attitude. We have to do our share in all inyanim. And when we do our share, we will also see to it that the Rebishter will bench us and our inyanim will be successful. But to sit back and not do a thing, this is not a proper attitude. Here again, the Rebbe referred to what he's been mentioned recently in a few Farbrengens, in the tefillos of Tikkun Chatzos. In the tefillos of Tikkun Chatzos, there's an expression, Ad Mosai. How much longer? How much longer will we be in Galus? And if this is something which is put into the tefillah of Tikkun Chatzos, Rebbe says those Yidden that would daven Tikkun Chatzos, they would say the tefillah of Tikkun Chatzos, getting up in the middle of the night and mourning on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and complaining to the Rabbeinu Shalom, Ad Masai, how much longer? This is not a tefillah which somebody would say without any intention. These are tefillahs which people would say with a lot of crying, their hearts out. And after a good Tikkun Chatzos, somebody who's saying properly Tikkun Chatzos, he does not go ahead and go to sleep afterwards. He learns through the night. After learning through the night, he goes to mikveh and goes to daven, and his davening is a completely different one. It's a type of davening where he has the proper pirush hamilas of what he's saying. And Memele, the admosai, how much longer, which we are begging the Rabbeinu Shalom, how much longer will you keep us in Galus, which is recited in this Tikkun Chatzos, is a tremendous tefillah which we are begging the Rabbeinu Shalom, how much longer will you keep us in Galus? It's a tefillah which comes with the most purest intentions, begging from the Rabbeinu Shalom, Ad Mosai. We find a similar expression, Ad Mosai, we find in today's Haftarah. Eliyahu HaNavi was telling to the Yidden, Ad Mosai atem peischem al shtei asifim. How much longer will you be on both ends, on both sides of the fence? Either you serve Hashem or Labal. So again, the expression of Ad Mosai which Eliyahu HaNavi used is also a wholehearted expression, begging Yidden, Ad Mosai, how much longer will you have such an attitude? So when we find this Nusach HaTfilah of Tikkun Chatzos, which is an extremely accurate tefillah, which was composed as every tefillah where every word is extremely accurate, and it has this expression of Ad Mosai, and Ad Mosai is mentioned there not only once, but it's repeated several times. Ad Mosai, how much longer will Yidden be kept in Galus? And this is an expression which Yidden wholeheartedly are begging from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Rabbeinu Shalom, how much longer will you keep us in Galus? The Maimah today, the Rebbe said, began with the words V'kibel ha-Yehudim eisa sharichelu lasos, which is the pasuk in the Megillah. And shaykhus of this Maimah to Purim Cotton is, as the Rebbe stressed, that in the year Tafresh Pei Zayin, 1927, the year of Prozois, as the Rebbe referred to it, that was the year when the whole Indian of Yud Beis Tammuz took place. That was the year when the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested and was released on the 12 days in the month of Tammuz. That year, on Purim Cotton, 14 days in Adar Rishon, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a maimer beginning with the words V'kibel ha-Yehudim eisa asher echelu lasos. The contents of that maimer was, as the Rebbe said it today again, was where the Frierdiker Rebbe was demanding from Hasidim and from Yidden tremendous amount of Mesiras Nefesh to keep up Yiddishkeit in that time Russia. And we can imagine what it meant from the Frierdiker Rebbe publicly in those days to come out with such type of a maimer. The Frierdiker Rebbe knew well that there were people from the KGB around and knew very well what he was saying. And nonetheless, the Rebbe did not take that into consideration at all and said such type of a maimer where he demanded and instructed Chassidim that we have to go for Mesiras Nefesh to spread Yiddishkeit and Chassidus. And when the Rebbe was saying over the maimer today, he said, how much more so is it today when Baruch Hashem we are living in countries when there is no need for Mesiras Nefesh for such type of inyanim, and the spreading of Yiddishkeit can be done in a very easy way. On the contrary, the governments we are living in do not interfere in any way to our fulfillment of Torah and Yiddishkeit. How much more so is it that we have to strengthen ourselves in this inyan of V'kibel ha-Yehudim eisa asher echelu lasos, which this is a pasuk in the Megillah which tells us that came Purim, Yidden strengthened themselves again in the inyan of Torah. In other words, which they began by Matan Torah. Came Purim, Yidden re-strengthened themselves again in observing the fulfillment of the Torah. How much more so is it now when Baruch Hashem we are living in countries where there is no one interfering with our learning Torah and with our fulfillment of mitzvahs, that definitely we have to see to it to spread Yiddishkeit as much as possible and to reach out to every Yid possible.
What is the translation of the pasuk?
The translation of the pasuk is, I said it, that the Yidden re-accepted the fulfillment of the Torah at the time of Purim. The Rebbe also discussed in the Siddur, we find, in the Nusach Hari Siddur, we find between Ashrei and Uval Etzion, it is listed all the days that we don't say Tachnun. It's Negeya for the days that we don't say the Lamanatzeach Yancha as well. And there's a whole Reshima of days, a whole listing of all the days which we do not recite Tachnun on. This list was made by the Alter Rebbe, who made the Nusach HaTfilah for us. And here we find Purim Cotton, we also do not say Tachnun, Beis Yamim both days. Shehu, what are these both days? Yudalid v'Tesvav, the 14th and the 15th of Adar Rishon. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on, as well as Purim Gadol, we also don't say Tachnun. Naturally, every word is extremely accurate by the Alter Rebbe. Why does the Alter Rebbe have to say Purim Cotton, Beis Yamim, the 2 days of Purim Cotton, which is Yudalid v'Tesvav of Adar? If the Alter Rebbe would have just said Purim Cotton, we would know when Purim Cotton is. We know when the date of Purim Cotton is. Purim Cotton is that in a leap year, the 14 days in Adar Rishon, it's Purim Cotton. Why does the Alter Rebbe have to say Purim Cotton, which is the 14th and 15th day of Adar? So Rebbe Zilchah explained that if we look back in Jewish history, there were many type of nisim. Says one of them is told about in one of the Sfarim of the Tosfos Yontif, where they tell of various cities or countries where there were various miracles, and the people in that specific country established this miracle as a Purim. And therefore, if the Alter Rebbe would only say Purim Cotton, we would not know that the Alter Rebbe is referring to the Purim Cotton, which is in the 14 days of Adar Rishon. Could be Purim Cotton in a specific country where they had a nest, and they celebrate that day, and they named that day Purim Cotton or Purim. There are, looking back at Jewish history, there are various, besides the main Purim, which we all know when we refer to, there are many smaller Purims, which Yidden named as a Purim, to tie it in with the concept of the great miracle that happened. That is why the Alter Rebbe has to express himself, Purim Cotton, Beis Yamim, and this is all, and it's not enough to say Purim Cotton, Beis Yamim. The Alter Rebbe also has to tell us that this is Yudalid v'Tesvav ba'Adar. If so, Why does the Alter Rebbe have to mention Purim Katan? Let the Alter Rebbe just say Yudalad and Tesvav Ada, we also don't say Tachna. But at the same time, the Alter Rebbe wants to give it a chshivas that this is an meaning of Purim. It's not just Yudalad and Tesvav. Why don't we say Tachna on the Yudalad and Tesvav of Adoration? Because it is Purim. It has an obvious shaychus to Purim, as just discussed. It's an inyan of Purim. So Memela, on Purim Katan, Beis Yomim, Yudalad to Tesvav Adoration, that's what Alter Rebbe has to explain both in Yonim. We do not recite the Tachna. Because these days are considered a Yontif. But again, the Rashi in this week's Sedra, Rebbe learned this afternoon the Rashi, first Rashi in Chamishi, on the Pasuk of Kapitel Lamed Daled, Pasuk Aleph. After Moshe has dropped the Luchas, after all in Yonim have taken Egel, Pasuk says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Psal lecha shnei luchos avonim karishonim. Actually, proper type of Psal lecha would be, the Rebbe is telling him, he should cut out 2 luchos, karishonim as the first ones. If we look into Rashi, there are 2 Rashis, both beginning with the words Psal lecha. Why taka are they 2 Rashis? Why isn't it incorporated in one Rashi? Rebbe says this can be explained simple. Let us look. The first Rashi is Psal lecha, explains in detail what has happened here, what he's telling him to do. The second Rashi is like a general interpretation on the whole inyan, what is going on. Let us look into both Rashis. Psal lecha. Hereyu HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him Machzav Sampirinen, cutting of Sampirinen is very precious stones. Mitoich Aholoi. In the tent of Moshe Rabbeinu. He pointed it out to him in Moshe Rabbeinu's tent. V'amalayin HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Hapsoiles yeh shalcha. Whatever is going to, the chips that are going to fall off from cutting out the luchos will belong to you, Moshe. Umisham nis asher Moshe harbe. And that is where Moshe became extremely wealthy. That is one Rashi. So actually, what is Rashi doing here? Rashi is teaching the word of Psal lecha. What does Psal lecha mean? That from the psilas, from the chips, Moshe will become very wealthy. In other words, not only does Psal lecha mean carve out, to go ahead and cut out, but it has an additional type. Psal, Meloshim psilas. That from the psilas, Moshe will become wealthy. That is one Rashi. Let us go on to the next Rashi. Psal lecha. Ata shibarta harishonis. Kadosh Baruch Hu told him, you have broken the first ones. Ata psal lecha acheros. Now go ahead and carve out other ones. And Rashi gives a whole mashal. Mashal melech shehalach l'mdinas hayam. It's compared a parable of a king that traveled very far. V'niach harusasa yimashvachos. He went off on a far journey, and he left over his arusa, his kala, together with the shivchos, together with the maids. Because the shvachos did not behave properly, it also created a bad name on the arusa of the king. The maids. Amat shushvina, so the bridesman rose the korak subasa, and he ripped up the ksuba. Amma, he said, Im yema hamelech laherga, if the king shall come back and say that she shall be killed, I will tell him, Adayin eina ishtecha, she's not your wife. She's only an arusa, she's only engaged to you. Badak HaMelech, the Melech investigated, Umotza Shaloihoya HaKilkal Ela Min HaShvachis. And he found that who were the ones that sinned? It was only the maids. Nisratzola, he forgave her. Amar lo Shushvina, Ksoiv lo Ksuba Acheres. So this Shushvin said, the Unterführer, this Shatchen, or however we should call him, write her a new Ksuba, Shenikra HaRishona, because the first one was torn. Amalei HaMelech, so the king told him, Ata Karatoi, so you were the one that ripped it up. Ata, now you go ahead, Knei Lechanaye Racha, buy new paper, V'ani Echtev lo B'Ksav Yodi, and I will write it in my handwriting. Kach HaMelech, Za HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's the king? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, naturally. HaShvachos, who are the Shvachos that did not behave properly? Ilu Erev Rav, that's the Erev Rav. HaShushvin is Moshe. Arusas shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's the Rebishter's Kale? That's the Yidden. Lekach nema psol lecha. That is why the Rebishter is addressing himself to Moshe. First of all, psol lecha means to carve out, right? In Lashon HaKodesh, carving is also considered choitzev, as Rashi himself uses the expression mechatzev, hereu mechatzev samperinu. Why is it taka that the pasuk has chosen to use the expression of psal, which Rashi has to come on to a whole Indian? So why is the expression of psal used? Because of Moshe's getting the chips that fell off. Why doesn't taka the pasuk use the expression of chatzav lecha? Also, how do these samperinim come in here? The Rebbeinu Shalom told him, go ahead and cut out 2 stones. So Rashi is not mentioning avonim, Rashi is mentioning the samperinim, which are choice quality stones. Why is Rashi getting involved in this? The emphasis, if we look into Medrash, which is the source for Rashi's Pirush, that we find various expressions in Medrash. One of the expressions we find in the Medrash, Bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu Samperinim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a nest, and he created this special precious stone so that Moshe should be able to carve that out. For some reason, Rashi does not quote the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a special stone. Why? Just Rashi says, he showed it to him. Where did he show it to him? In his tent. How did Moshe have it in his tent? In other words, in Moshe's Ohel, where Moshe lived, that is where he had the Samperinim. Why is this that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave Moshe additional wealth? The Yidden had wealth. There was the Bizas Hayam, there was Bizas Mitzrayim, which the Yidden had and took along with them. No, the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to give Moshe an additional wealth. And look at the expression in Rashi, Misham nis asher Moshe harbe. He wanted to give him a very tremendous amount, an enormous amount of wealth HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give him. And what is this whole thing with the Arusa, with the mashal, which Rashi quotes? If the Shushvin is the one who is getting involved in the writing of the Ksubah, then the Shushvin should be involved in writing the stone, the Luchos as well, just like in the mashal. This whole Indian requires a tremendous amount of clarification. Abba learns as follows. We'll go through it briefly. Pasuk comes out with an expression, psal lecha. So right away Rashi is troubled. Why taka does the Pasuk use the expression psal rather than chatzev, which means to carve? So Rashi right away tells us, why tak is there another expression used here? Because there's an additional meaning here. Child knows very well that words have shoroshim in Lashon HaKodesh, and there's certain words which can be interpreted with several meanings. And that is why when we find in the pasuk the expression psal tak could mean carve, but psal has another meaning. What is the other meaning? That the chips that will fall off the stone should belong to Moshe Rabbeinu. So that is why the Torah has chosen here to use an expression that has a double meaning, rather than using just the expression of Chatzayv. Because the Rebishter wants to tell Moshe Rabbeinu that he's taka out to give him an additional wealth. All the Yidden had Bizas Hayam and Bizas Mitzrayim. We find in Chazal tell us that while the Yidden were busy collecting the riches and wealth from the Mitzrayim, what did Moshe do? Moshe was busy with something else. Moshe was busy with carrying Atzmos Yosef, with getting out the body of Yosef from Mitzrayim. So Mamela Moshe really didn't get a proper share in Bizas Hayam and in Bizas Mitzrayim. So here the Rebbeinu Shalom is rewarding Moshe with a tremendous amount of wealth, that the chips of these stones should be able to belong to him.
These are the chips from the second?
Second, yes.
That fell off when he carved them?
Yes. However, Rashi does not want to get involved, stressing the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a certain type of stone, because the child who is learning Chumash is well aware that we try to avoid HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing nisim when there's no need for it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu le'ovid nisa l'magona, there's an expression. Mamela, so Rashi doesn't want to get involved that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a special stone. However, we do have to learn that the clouds that were protecting the Yidden while the Yidden were traveling in the Midbar, where Bechlal does Moshe Rabbeinu have is Samperinen in his tent? The Yidden were in the Midbar. What is there in the Midbar? There are no precious jewels, there are no precious stones in the Midbar. However, this was somehow some sort of this in itself is a nest, which is spelled out in Rashi clear enough, that the Anonim, as they were landing, as the Yidden set, Moshe Rabbeinu's ohel set in such a place where he found some perinen, which as the child is learning the Rashi sees this Inyan. So Rashi is not getting involved stressing Bora Samperinen, that the Rebbe created these Samperinen, but he doesn't want to stress the fact of HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing an extra nes. However, at the same time, it is pretty obvious that there was a nes here. Because otherwise, how do Samperinen come in the Midbar? The child who has learned this Rashi knows that Moshe Rabbeinu had a Mata Yelikim, the stick. Moshe Rabbeinu's stick was a very special stick. Moshe Rabbeinu's stick was able to accomplish when the stick hit the stone, other types of things. Moshe Rabbeinu's stick was a very special stick. Memela, the child knows that if Moshe Rabbeinu has his Samperinen, his precious stone, they are also something very, very special. It's also an extremely special thing which has something very special in it. Then we go into the next Rashi. Next Rashi discusses Psal Lecha. And here Rashi is giving like an overview on the whole Inyan. And in fact, that is why it is two separate Rashis. First, there's a Rashi that touches up the world. Then there's a Rashi that gives an interpretation on the whole Inyan. If so, the Rebbe Bavornt, Rashi should have said Psal Lecha v'goymer, because Rashi, the second Rashi, because Rashi isn't only teaching the words of Psal Lecha. Rashi is teaching the whole idea. The Rebbe says we find already in the Inyanim of Mishkan, for example, by the Ephod. So Rashi also says, first he will touch up the words, then he will give a general description what the Ephod is all about. The same thing, there's no need for Rashi to add on the V'goyma, because Rashi, Psal Lecha, just like over there Rashi quotes Vasisa Ephod. Rashi doesn't say Vasisa Ephod V'goyma, because the Vasisa Ephod is like, that's the caption of what is discussed here. The same thing, Psal Lecha, here is discussed, not just the word Psal Lecha v'goyma with the next word or so, it's the whole idea of Psal Lecha is discussed here. What has actually happened? The Erev Rav. Erev Rav has misbehaved. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Lech Reit, actually we find in Psukim before, Ki Shiches Amcha, your nation has gone spoiled. And as Rashi comments, whom was the Rabbeinu Shalom referring to? Rabbeinu Shalom is referring to the Erev Rav. Though the Erev Rav converted, it was Nisgaya, and the Rebbe added on, it was definitely a Giyur Kahalacha, no question about it. However, the mere fact that we find in the Torah tells us that we are supposed to treat Kageir Ke'ezra Haaretz, we're supposed to treat a Geir as a Yid. This in itself shows us that the Geir as yet has something within him that the Torah has to give us a special warning that we have to treat him like a Yid. If he would be perfect, then there wouldn't be a need that we have to treat him Ke'ezra Haaretz. The mere fact that the Torah tells us Ke'geir Ke'ezra Haaretz, this in itself shows us that there's something wrong within him, as we see right here. That who were the ones that misled the Yidden, that the Yidden should get involved with the Egel? It was the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav, who were they? They were Geirim. So Memele, Rabbeinu Shalom gave him already an indication, Shichei Samcha, that the Erev Rav has gone wrong. The Erev Rav have gone wrong, and as Rashi explains it here at length with this parable, that they are compared to the Shvachos. Now the only question here is, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that the Shnei Luchos Avanim should be Korishonim, should be just like the first ones. V'chasafti ala Luchos, and the Rabbeinu Shalom says he will write on the Luchos as hadvarim asher hayu ala Luchos harishonim asher shebarta, the same thing that was written on the first set of Luchos. So the question was, why didn't the Rabbeinu Shalom let Moshe Rabbeinu write it? If Moshe Rabbeinu is Psal Lecha, if he's the one who's carving them out and cutting them out, let him also do the writing. This is what the Rebbe asked. So that couldn't have been. Why? Being that we read earlier, V'hamichtav michtav elekimhu, that the first luchos was a holy writing. It was a mizeh ksuvim. It was a type of writing which a human being cannot do. It was written through and through. Such type of a writing cannot be done by a Moshe Rabbeinu, but neither could it be done by any human being. Memela, being that the Rebbe wanted to fulfill Moshe Rabbeinu's request that the luchos should be kori shoinim as the first ones, so the Rebbe told him, listen, you are the shushvin, so memela psal luchos shnei luchos avanim kori shoinim. You are the bridesman. Go ahead and prepare the luchos and do all the preparations. However, when it will come to the writing, that you can't do, because it has to be a michtav elakim, just like the first luchos was. This is something which the Rabbeinu Shalom says only I could do. Memela, you go ahead and do the carving. However, it will come to the ksiva. The ksiva can only be done by the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rabbeinu Shalom will write, so by the Rabbeinu Shalom suggesting and doing that Moshe is the one that's cutting, and however the Rabbeinu Shalom is the one that's writing. By this, the Rabbeinu Shalom is expressing that he's accepting Moshe Rabbeinu's full request for forgiveness, that the second lucha should be exactly like the first ones. So that is why everything is extremely accurate. And Rashi gives us a whole interpretation to tell us that the Gerim, the Erev Rav, were the ones that misled the Yidden, and Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that peiled by the Eibishter, that the Eibishter should not take it in consideration. And that is why the Rebbe told him, you go ahead and psalacha, you go ahead and cut out the luchos. However, the writing of the luchos, v'chasafti ala luchos, es advara mashahay ala luchos harishayim masha shebauta. The Rabbeinu Shalom gave in to Moshe's request to go ahead and fulfill the writing on the luchos.